right, Herle Burlyites, we've got a special episode for you for our last episode of 2021. We have the Minister of National Defense, Anita Anand, with us today, and I couldn't be more thrilled. Right at the center, at the heart of some of the biggest issues facing the government for the last several years, Minister Anand just was acclaimed most valuable player by the Hill Times newspaper and still agreed to come on this show, even with that status. We're thrilled. She was born in Nova Scotia. She moved to Oakville. She was a lawyer. She taught law. Then she ran in 2019. She became the Minister of Procurement and Public Works. And then after this past election, became the Minister of National Defense. We have no shortage of things to talk about. But let me start, Minister, by asking you how you are.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having the conversation with me today. I'm really excited to have a chat.
Yeah, it will be a lot of fun. How's your COVID existence?
Well, I guess by how am I coping with COVID? Is that the question?
Yeah.
You know, I'm a homebody. I have my sweatpants on the bottom half of this outfit.
Excellent.
I am regularly looking for ways to get back home. So being at home over the past year and a half, I have 4 kids, 2 dogs. Well, 3 dogs now because my daughter got a dog. I'm supposedly the grandmother of this dog. And it's been, a real joy to be able to be at home and to be able to work really hard from this office. I do miss my colleagues in Ottawa. And over the last few weeks, being able to connect with them has been a real joy.
No. Aren't dogs the best? I mean, I know your colleagues. I know you like your colleagues, but aren't dogs the best?
I actually just shooed my dog out of this office because every time somebody walks by, she barks. So I was trying to be respectful, but she's now whining outside the door of this office. So I'm not sure which is better.
I just knocked down everything on my wall to show you this picture. This is my dog. This is
so cute. What type of dog is that?
That's a border collie.
We had a collie. Our first dog was a collie when I was little, and we love that dog so much. Anyway, Dogs are the best. So 3 dogs, 4 kids, busy house, but just the way I like it.
Excellent. I just want to get this out of the way off the top. You taught at a law school that would not allow me to study there. So that's just the nature of our relationship heading into this interview. I applied.
I'm sure I wasn't on the admissions committee at that time. So
no, it was 1988, and I don't think you were on the admissions committee.
I was still in undergrad.
I gave U of T Law 2 chances to have me, and they declined both times. Might have been my transcript.
Well, who knows? Their loss.
Hey, what's a big interest of yours other than politics?
Well, I am, as I said, a homebody. I'm also a family person. So I take any opportunity and create opportunities for me to be with my kids and my family. So one of the funny things that we've been doing pre-COVID as a family is going to the World Junior Hockey Championships, wherever they are occurring. And we've been doing that since 2013. All my kids play hockey. My husband coaches hockey, etc. And so growing up in rural Nova Scotia in, the 70s, I was not big into hockey in a South Asian family, especially. And I'll just say I'll go anywhere with my kids. So whether we're watching hockey or anything, I am right there with them anytime I can be. They keep me laughing and they tease me relentlessly, I'll say. But it's still a real joy for me. And outside of that, I love going for long walks with my dogs and hikes with my family and my dogs as well. So I think my kids are getting sick of my posts that have me on trails with dogs. They're like, enough, Mom. Everyone knows you walk dogs. So thanks.
I thought you might say music, because I saw a picture of you with Drake and with A.J. Vermani and Vina Vermani. So which of those 3 celebrities do you know? Drake, AJ, or Vinay?
Okay. Ajay Vermani, I know. His firm brought a lot of important PPE from international destinations to Canada, especially during the first part of the pandemic. So we are very grateful to Cargojet. And then he received the Walk of Fame, so invited me to a dinner, and Drake happened to be at that dinner.
Right.
So I ended up meeting Drake, and when I met him, I started singing, "Used to call me on your cell phone." And he started laughing, and he took my cell phone from me and put his number in there, saying "Drake, trusted advisor" in my cell phone. And we were joking, exchanged cell numbers and texts thereafter, which people find kind of interesting.
No kidding. Drake is huge, but AJ is one of the great business stories of Canada.
No question. And it is incredible to see the way in which he has built Cargojet and continues to make Cargojet relevant and important as an airline here in Canada. And as I said, the work that they have done, especially during the pandemic, has been second to none.
I met AJ back in 2004. Do you know that he flew Paul Martin in the 2004 and 2006 election campaigns?
I definitely did not know that.
He reconfigured the plane that he had for the Raptors at that time, and we used it in the 2004-2006 election campaign.
You know what's so interesting, just from my vantage point, pre-2019, I was so focused on my academic career and raising my kids that I really have not experienced many of the same things that people who have been in political lives for decades have experienced. So I always find these stories quite fascinating, the Paul Martin campaign or the, Jean Chrétien years. I'm not a player in those times at all.
I'm the only source you need on those subjects. Okay. I'll tell you all you need to know.
I don't know if an hour is enough then, David.
Well, let's talk about politics. How'd you get into it? What motivated you to, I actually read that you had been interested in it even back in Nova Scotia. But in 2019, what ultimately encouraged you to take that plunge?
Oh, it was a series of conversations that I was having. And somebody asked me if I wanted to meet the Prime Minister. So I said, sure. Who wouldn't? So I wasn't teaching on that day. So I went and met him for 2 minutes when he was at a school in Markham. And, he encouraged me to run. And so I was thinking seriously about it, but there was no riding available. And my riding certainly wasn't available. It was the beginning of 2019. And then our local MP decided not to run in mid-February. And then it just seemed to be kind of doors opening for me to run. And so I started thinking more seriously about it. But I was actually challenged in my nomination by 2 people, one of whom was former cabinet minister in the Wynne government. Everybody knew who he was.
Kevin Flynn.
Nobody knew who I was. So I'd go to the door. This is in the nomination. And I'd say, I'm running to be the Liberal candidate here in Oakville. And they were like, well, who are you? We don't know who you are. Literally, those were the words. And I had to start from scratch, every door talking about why I wanted to run and why I think I would be good as an elected leader. So that was a very long haul. And the night before the nomination meeting, my husband, John, came to me and said, look, if you don't win, it's okay. And I said, I know it's okay. It's going to be fine, because I had not resigned from my job. I was still a prof and everything. So I happened to win on the first ballot and then kept going to the general and was able to get elected.
But I'm interested in this, Minister, because I think that it's getting more difficult to recruit accomplished people into politics. And there's a lot of lifestyle reasons for that. And you're sort of at the heart of that. You had a job that presumably, well, first of all, it was in your own town, so it was convenient. And it had secure job security. I presume you had tenure. and tenure is the furthest concept from politics. And especially in the minorities in which you've known politics. And the pay would be no better. And so what made you feel that you should uproot your life like that in order to go into politics?
David, you're raising so many good points there about recruiting good people to politics. So I think we should also pursue that. I'll just tell you a little bit about what motivated me to give up a life that I loved and miss every day. The pull for me was to be able to contribute more on a national scale. And so my mom, when we were little, when we were about 4 or 5, she drove us down the highway to CFB Greenwood, and a helicopter was landing, and she got us out of the car, and we stood behind a barricade, and out of the helicopter stepped Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and he walked directly over to my mom. Immediately after coming out of the helicopter, there were hundreds of people there. He walked over to my mother, who was dressed in a sari, and he said, "Namaste." We were 5 and 6 at the time, my sister and I. And when on our way home, she said, "Your country needs you. You need to serve your country." And she never stopped saying that. She died in 2014, but her message to us, really, so sad. It still seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
But that message of public service has continued to motivate my sisters and me. And that was really the impetus for me to say, is this something that I can do? And can I give up a life that I love? So it's difficult when you give up a life that you love, but I had been trying in academia to make more impact on public policy. So I'd written reports for the province of Ontario, for the federal government, for the Air India inquiry. Those were all kind of public forays, if you will. But then I realized really the impact was not going to be as large as it could be. And so I said, is there another way? And running for office was another way that I could use my skills to bear on public policy.
I can't think of one person who I think inspired more people to go into politics in Canada than Pierre Trudeau. So it's amazing your origin story goes back to that.
Mm-hmm.
In an effort to be both relevant and constructive, 2 things that are always at the top of my list of life goals, along with one day owning a pair of Elton John's platform boots circa 1973, we've been talking about giving season. We're now deep in the throes of giving season, which is to say, there's a whole lot of giving going on. The good people who present our show, TELUS, operate their company with social purpose. For TELUS, giving is a core value, 365 days a year. In fact, they've been called the most giving company, having contributed over $1.2 billion to charitable organizations in Canada. Here's the thing. TELUS wants to give more, and they need your help to do it. And so they're putting out this challenge to all of you generous and influential Herle Burlyites. This year, as you reach out to your local charitable and community organizations, shelters, senior centers, women's and children's charities, and the like, if you could please let them know that TELUS has a number of giving programs that can help so many vulnerable Canadians get connected to technology. Last week, we talked about mobility for good. This week, I want to tell you about Internet for Good. Internet for Good provides lowest cost internet to families in need, youth aging out of care, low-income seniors, and people on disability assistance, so they can reach their full potential. It's pretty clear how important these programs are for vulnerable Canadians, Herle Burlyites. So TELUS really wants you to take up the challenge and spread the word. Help make sure the organizations you support know there are programs to support their clients. Because when technology becomes more equal for us all, the country is just so much better off. To find out more, go to telus.com/connectingcanada. Who are a couple political heroes of yours? Not just in Canada, but anywhere.
Oh, Mahatma Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
His personal suffering that he pushed to the side in order for him to work towards the broader cause of India's independence in a way that was, on the whole, nonviolent. Barack Obama, in the way that he was able to inspire generations of future leaders, including myself. And of course, I would say Mother Teresa, in that she also led a selfless life to give service to the broader community. Those are just a few. I read a lot of biographies, so I could run off a whole bunch of others.
Yeah. I presume it was Obama's campaigns rather than his administration that inspired you.
Exactly. So I would say that he really was not someone who people thought was going to be elected in 2008.
Right.
And he himself had many moments in the campaign where he didn't know if he would ultimately be successful. And he made decisions based on what he felt was morally right to say and do, regardless of whether he was going to be elected. And I like to think that I also care about those issues in the moment as opposed to the political calculation.
Cool. All right. Thanks for that. Crasser politics. Now, you won your riding in this past election by 4,000 votes. It's pretty comfortable. But it probably also means that at some point in the campaign, you were losing. Did you feel that? What were you hearing at the door in the campaign?
I felt great during the campaign. And I executed this campaign like my first campaign, which is don't talk negatively about your opponent. Don't talk negatively about the party that she represents, and stand for the values and the policy platform ideals that we as a party are putting forward. I am not a negative person, and I don't go down the road of negativity. Even when our signs were being destroyed, over 40% of our signs were destroyed in this campaign.
Right.
That's a large number. I did not go down the road of criticizing any of my opponents. We didn't know who was damaging our signs, for example. Right. I think the most important thing is for politics to be about what you represent, what you want to do, as opposed to bringing down others. And that's what I try to model, and that's what I stand for.
Okay. You must have been surprised, though, because you'd been at the center of a government that had done a pretty good job of managing the pandemic. You must have been surprised at some of the pushback that you were getting during the campaign. Where was it coming from? What are people looking for from the government that they aren't getting or weren't getting?
I think there are a lot of concerns in my riding, in particular about our fiscal track and our focus on supporting Canadians during the pandemic versus ensuring that we are also focused on the debt and what plans we have as a government to ensure that we are focused on debt reduction so as to avoid intergenerational debt transfer. And those are very serious issues and ones that I can speak knowledgeably about, given that my role as a professor was in the corporate and securities law area. So I have frequently had those conversations with people in our riding and across government, because I do think it is important for us to be focused on the fiscal situation, as well as continuing to serve Canadians during what is now fifth wave of the pandemic.
Right. Interesting. As a corporate governance expert, what do you think about the way the government is organized and operates?
Well, this is a very large question, David, and I have often said when I leave politics, one of my first articles will be on this very subject. So I don't want to give away too much about what will be in my first article, or no one will read it.
I don't think anybody's looking forward to the end of your political career yet, Minister Anand.
But let me just say that I came into politics wanting to make sure that I represent what I believe is important in a politician, which is professionalism, ethics, and having rational debate based on facts. And that's what I'd like to see more and more of in government across the board.
Right. Okay. Is there any way? Well, I don't want to scoop your article, but we are running the government very, very, very similar to the way it was run in 1965, and everything has changed since 1965. The complexity of government, the size of government, the speed of decision making in society. I'm just curious about whether or not we're keeping up.
Well, actually, I would take issue. I don't think we are running government in 2021 the way it was run in the 60s. Especially during the pandemic, we have seen an astronomical rise in the use of digital technology. And in particular, the fact that 338 members of the House of Commons can participate in the business of the House of Commons is testament to my point. And I will further say that as Minister of National Defense, one of the issues that I have been focused on is cybersecurity, for the very reason that we are seeing our entire world utilize digital platforms and broader internet-based technology for personal and sometimes nefarious gain. And I believe that we need to be sure that we have strong and secure cyber platforms and defenses to ward off those threats. So I'll just say, I think we could have a debate about the comparison between 1960s government and 2021 government.
Okay. Good. I appreciate a good debate. I have a question I'm actually reluctant to ask you because I don't do gotcha questions on this show, and that isn't the point of this show. But there's something in the news today that bothers me, and you're here, and I want to ask you about it. And that is Dominic Barton is the second significant Canadian ambassador to resign and immediately join a company with private interests. That makes me cynical. Should it?
Well, listen, I worked closely with Dominic Barton during the pandemic because without him and his team on the ground in China, we would not have been able to get out so much of the PPE that we relied on in the first part of the pandemic. Okay. Over the course of the pandemic at PSPC, we procured 2.5 billion articles of PPE, and the first 100 plane loads of PPE from international resources were largely because of the work that Dominic Barton and his team were doing on the ground. So I am very grateful to Dominic Barton for his service, as well as his work in freeing the two Michaels. So I am focused on how I have been in touch with Dominic Barton, and I know him to be an upstanding individual and someone who worked extremely hard for our country. And I will continue to say that. Again, I was on the phone with him almost every day.
Wow.
At the first part of the pandemic, every day. And he was up all night, as was I. But we were only focused on how to get the PPE across gloves, gowns, and masks of all types to warehouses, and out of those warehouses onto planes. Cargojet was one of them, Air Canada, these planes, and get it back to Canada. This was the most urgent situation our country was in. We had frontline healthcare workers who were really suffering without this PPE. And I will say that I am so thankful to the entire team that Dominic Barton led for their work.
Well, there you go. That's a pretty complete, compelling answer. So thank you for that. Well, the lower mainland of British Columbia is no longer cut off from the rest of Canada. Washed out roads and rail links in the province's interior have been largely re-established. And the story of BC's worst flooding in modern history is already fading from newscasts and front pages. But of course, for British Columbians who've suffered through remarkably severe weather this year, let's not forget that the same area was burned by some of the hottest temperatures on Earth just 6 months ago. The disaster continues. BC's Deputy Premier, with great understatement, has said that the scope of the damage inflicted by repeated atmospheric rivers was extraordinary. Our sponsor, CN, has been at the heart of the relief efforts and can vouch for that. The railway has donated $100,000 to the Red Cross. CN sent more than 400 people into the region when the floods hit, and they've been working 24/7 since. They've helped rescue stranded residents. They've ferried healthcare workers to isolated areas. They've delivered medical equipment. Oh, and they've also done some serious engineering. CN had 58 track outages spread across 245 kilometers. All are now passable. In the process, CN employees used 110 pieces of heavy equipment to move 282,000 cubic yards of rock and earth and sludge. The fact is, CN is part of the communities its tracks run through. The people who live in those towns and cities are its neighbors. A lot of CN's employees in British Columbia make their homes in the interior. In any case, news headlines might fade, but CN will not. It will be there working side by side with British Columbians until the cleanup is done. BC can count on it. Let's get to the pandemic and let's get to procurement, because what a story it must be. And I'd like to hear you outline sort of the story behind the vaccine procurements, because I assume it's very dramatic. But let's start with, when did you realize how big this thing was?
Well, can I just back up for a second?
Yeah.
And can I just back up to when I was appointed to be in cabinet as the PSPC minister? And I, of course, said yes, I would be honored. I had in my mind, regardless of what the Prime Minister was going to ask me, I was going to say the words, I would be so honored. Because I would be so honored, but also it was going to be, I knew, a very intense moment for me. My heart was already beating just thinking about it very hard. Yeah. So I went into the room and the Prime Minister said, I would like you to be the Minister of Public Services and Procurement. And I said, I would be so honored. And then I left and I went and looked up what the Minister of Public Services and Procurement did. And I'm seeing massive items in the portfolio: Canada Post, Phoenix Pay System, all federal properties, all ship and jet procurements. So I was taken aback that particular day, let me assure you of that. And then I got to talking with cabinet colleagues, and one cabinet colleague, who will remain nameless, said to me, don't worry, you are going to be in the background. No one will know who you are. You won't need to do press conferences, and you will learn about government, which will be a very good way for you to get your start in politics. Right. So really don't worry at all. And that advice lasted for about 2 months until the pandemic hit. And then everyone started asking, does Canada have a Minister of Procurement? And lo and behold, Canada did. And lo and behold,
it was you.
All of a sudden, I was finding myself at press conferences.
Yeah.
And I can remember my first press conference in late March 2020. And I was in between, I think it was Christia and Nav. And I was actually saying to myself, oh my goodness, what is happening here? I am at the press conference that I usually watch.
Right. You got a jetpack strapped to your back.
Yeah. So my approach at every press conference then and now is to present the facts to Canadians. And that's my job. I am telling Canadians what I am working on their behalf. And I did it all through the pandemic and procurement, perhaps ad nauseum. I believe people probably didn't like how many numbers I was giving out, because it can get somewhat tedious. But I believed that they needed to know how many vaccines were coming and how many vaccines we expected. And that was what I was focusing on every single day. Now, I have not yet answered your question, but I'll pause here and ask you if you want to say anything before I actually answer the question about the story of the vaccine procurements.
No, go right into it. Starting with when you realized that we were in what we were in.
So, of course, I look at the pandemic and my work in procurement as a whole, right? Not just in terms of vaccines. So when I look at the whole thing, I visualize 3 mountains. In the first mountain, we were climbing the procurement and the challenge of obtaining PPE for our country. That was what was the immediate need, and we procured 2.5 billion items of PPE while at the same time building Canadian manufacturing supply chains. And we reached a point where over 40% of our contracts by dollar value were with Canadian manufacturers, which is incredible because we saw Canadian businesses stepping up to produce gowns and face shields and hand sanitizer and masks. Okay. So now we have N95 masks being produced in Canada at 3M and at Medicom, whereas at the beginning of the pandemic, that was not occurring.
Right.
So that's the first mountain. The second mountain was the procurement of rapid tests, where when I was minister, we procured over 55 million rapid tests for the provinces and territories and distributed those.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. I live in Ontario. That's a myth. You never bought any rapid tests. There are no rapid tests in Ontario.
Yes, I beg to differ. Based on the facts, I can assure you that we produced or procured millions and millions and millions of rapid tests for the provinces and territories, and implored the provinces and territories to distribute these tests for use by their citizens. Now that number has increased substantially, and we are continuing to distribute these tests. I can only say that testing and tracing, as we all know, is so important, especially with the Omicron virus. So then that was the second mountain.
Wait, I got a sidebar question now that you've raised that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a federalism question. But people are raising it now. Why didn't the feds send rapid tests out to people directly? Rather than sending them to the provinces. What is the instinct that says we should give them to the provinces rather than we should give them to people when you're in Ottawa?
I will take you back to the Constitution. I will take you back to the division of powers. I will take you back to the administration of healthcare, which is in section 91, 92 of the Constitution as being within provincial jurisdiction. So what we were doing...
I'd know that if I'd gone to U of T Law.
You would know that if you went to any law school. Did you go to law school?
I did. I went to the University of Saskatchewan, and I do know.
You do know that. So I'll just say that what our approach was as a government is to support the provinces. We bought all of the vaccines all of the vaccine supplies to administer the vaccines. And then we made sure that the provinces were supported to engage in those inoculations. In terms of financial support, of course, we had the $19 billion federal restart funding that was given to the provinces and territories. So the approach that we were taking as a federal government is to support the provinces and territories and the healthcare system in whatever way we possibly can. And that is the reason for the decisions that were made along those lines.
Okay.
And we were coordinating well with the premiers, the Prime Minister, as you know, met with the premiers every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so this is a system that in a time of crisis, we were cooperating, I believe, quite well. And whenever we weren't, I made sure that from my vantage point, I was not going to be speaking negatively about provincial premiers, because that is not my role. My role was to procure, and that's exactly what we did. So can I go on to the third mountain, or are you going to keep asking me questions?
No, keep going. Your third mountain. I just need a break between mountain 2 and mountain 3. I need a little rest.
Okay. So mountain 3 was, of course, the most challenging, the steepest mountain to climb. That was on the procurement of vaccines. We received advice from the Vaccine Task Force to enter into agreements with 7 leading vaccine manufacturers. They had considered over 200 vaccine manufacturers, and their expert advice led to a list of 7. They gave that list to us, and we proceeded to procure vaccines, enter into contracts with those 7 suppliers. And that was August 2020. We were one of the first countries to sign with Moderna at the beginning of August, the 4th country to sign with Pfizer. And we continue to move very quickly to execute those agreements. And I needed to impress upon my team every single day how important executing on these contracts were. And I think it's important for everyone to realize that at that time, there were no vaccines that had passed stage 3 clinical trials. Right. So we were very much operating on a strategy of don't put all your eggs in one basket. Make sure you diversify your vaccine procurement portfolio. I was taking lessons from my work in financial markets there, and make sure you have access to whatever vaccine crosses the finish line first. And when we got the clinical trial results for Pfizer and Moderna in November, which showed that they were in the 90% range of effectiveness, I immediately began ensuring that we had deliveries aussitôt que possible so that Canadians could have access to vaccines. And I also at the same time said to the suppliers that we want to be one of the first countries to begin inoculations, period. So I would like to have vaccines before the Christmas holidays. And so we were able to convince Pfizer to send us vaccines in early December. Moderna, Christmas Eve day, I was up at Pearson receiving the Moderna vaccines that were coming to this country. And then I can go on about the continued steep climb to vaccine procurement, to the nadir, if you will, of our strategy through 2021. And there were difficulties because Pfizer decided to shut down its Belgium plant for a couple of weeks to retool. And what I did during that time is saying, okay, well, you're making that decision, which impacts our countries. How can you make it up to us? And by the end of the first quarter, we finished with 3.5 million more vaccines than we had anticipated. So 9.5 million vaccines. And we just kept climbing through the spring. We ended June with over 50 million vaccines, and we ended July with enough vaccines to inoculate all eligible Canadians. And that was because we kept pushing. We never took our foot off the gas. We never said enough is enough. We kept going. We accelerated 28 million vaccines from later to earlier quarters in the year. And I'll just say that I learned so much during that time frame. And in particular, I learned that you need in vaccine procurement to separate out the conclusion of the vaccine contract itself and the actual arrival of the product for which you contracted. And that both of those two things are separate processes, and that in a world where supply chains are constrained, like they are in vaccines, we needed to keep pressing. And I developed the personal connection, shall I say, with the vaccine manufacturers to make sure that they knew how important this was to our government and to our country at large.
Yeah, well, tremendous success, and congratulations for it. I guess my remaining question, and it's because of the development of both Delta and Omicron, is how are we going to vaccinate the world so that this merry-go-round doesn't keep happening, so that I'm not sitting around 6 months from now watching a new variant emerge because this stew is still cooking all over the world? How are we going to do that?
We operated on two tracks in vaccine procurement. I being responsible for the vaccines coming in, and other ministers being responsible for the vaccines going out. And we worked very closely together, Minister Gould and I, on that, of course, with Minister Haidu in the last session of government. And in particular, we have ensured that we've donated over $400 million to the COVAX facility. Right. We've made sure that we are donating vaccines. We are playing a leading role in the governance of the COVAX facility, as well as entering into bilateral deals with governments to give them vaccines. So Trinidad and Tobago being one of the recipients. So I would just say we're operating on two tracks, recognizing got to inoculate Canadians, got to make sure you're supporting global vaccine efforts. And we'll keep doing that because, as we continue to say, and you said it yourself, unless everyone is safe, no one is safe. It's true. We need to make sure that the world can be vaccinated.
Right. Have Pfizer and Moderna made enough money off of their invention that we can now take that patent away and produce these things cheaply?
Well, you're asking me to speak for Pfizer Moderna here, which is something I won't do because I can't. I don't have access.
No, I'm not asking when they judge that they've made enough money off those things. I'm asking when it's fair to judge that they've made enough money off.
I think that we need collectively to make sure that we are all working on global vaccine inoculation. And I can tell you that we have Minister Ng at the table, making sure that our obligations under trade agreements allow us to share patents. It is important, but as I said, it is also the work of everyone. It is the work of government. It is the work of private enterprise. It is the work of international organizations, and we all need to get on board the same ship to ensure that the world gets vaccinated.
Okay, cool. Let's move forward to national defense, if we can. Your new portfolio. It's quite a reward for having accomplished so much in your previous job that they give you the biggest mess in the government. You and the chief of the defense staff started off by indicating that you were going to make an apology and then making an apology to members of the armed forces who had suffered from harassment or discrimination or assault. Was that difficult to do?
So again, I'll just take you back. I like to just have a little bit of backup so that you get the full context for what was happening on December 13th, which was the day of the apology. So I came in on October 27th and was told about this apology, which was in the works as a result of the Hayter Beatty class action lawsuit. And I thought long and hard about what was the best way for me to support the apology, which I think and thought was a very important and good thing. Right. And I decided that it was important for me to participate for moral, personal reasons as the leader now of the Canadian Armed Forces from a civilian standpoint,
Right.
but also on behalf of our government. So it was perhaps the most difficult set of remarks I have ever written and delivered. It was the first time I have ever cried after giving remarks, which was indicative to me of how different this type of thing was than everything I've been used to doing in my professional life in and outside of government. And I think that it was important because we have such a long road to travel in terms of cultural change in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I want to make sure that at the beginning of that road is an apology.
Okay. How do you change the culture of an organization like that? I mean, it is used to be entirely men. Now it's still large majority of men. And men in large numbers have a culture that sometimes behave in ways that necessarily they wouldn't in other circumstances. Probably certain types of people choose to go into the armed forces. I mean, from your standpoint, where you are in your office, in your home office, how do you begin to change a culture?
So my approach has been to recognize that cultural change in the Canadian Armed Forces is not going to happen overnight, that we need to recognize that we are going to have to work together, Chief of Defense Staff and I primarily, to take what will be incremental steps to ensure that cultural change occurs, and that these steps are going to be having to be taken on many levels. One of which is recruitment and retention in the Canadian Armed Forces. I have been visiting bases across the country, Shearwater, Borden, Edmonton, and each base I visit, I see the willingness of Canadian Armed Forces members to see the benefits of diversity and inclusion, to recognize the importance of cultural change in and among the ranks. So that's just one area.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are other areas of reform, the military justice system. And in that regard, on November 4th, I accepted the recommendation of Madame Arbour to transfer cases from the military to the civilian justice
system. That strikes me as a big change.
That's a big change. That's a big change that our peer countries are not yet undertaking. I know they're considering it, and certainly the United States shortly after made an announcement which is somewhat similar. But I will just say it is a big change. But again, I came into the office, I saw the letter from Madame Arbour, and I said, we are going to do this.
Right.
Other areas that we are working on include the work of Jenny Carignan and Dr. Preston to look at what supports Canadian Armed Forces members have now. Do they have peer-to-peer support? That's something they need. Mental health supports, professional conduct supports. So that is something we are also working on. So you can see we're firing on a number of different cylinders here, and we will keep working on this until we make these changes, till we keep walking down this road. But as you know, I'm results oriented. And I received my mandate letter, and it's very long. And I'm just saying that my goal is to keep making sure that positive change is occurring, not only in terms of culture change in the military, but on all those other items in my mandate letter as well.
I'm going to ask you the most Neanderthalic question that I can possibly come up with out of my poorly evolved brain, which is, does this culture change have a negative impact on our ability to fight?
Well, I will just say, stepping back, that let's make sure we recognize how deep the commitment is of the Canadian Armed Forces to serving our country and our global community. Over the last year and a half alone, the CAF have been deployed 12 times. They have helped in vaccine deployment. They have made sure that we have care in long-term care homes.
That was the most tragic.
In there. Yes. They have helped with forest fires and floods. They've gone into Afghanistan. I mean, really, their work is second to none. And we have, as a society, relied on their dedication and their commitment every step of the way. And I want to thank the Canadian Armed Forces for their work, for the betterment of our society. But David, we have to protect those who protect our country. And while they are serving, they need to know that they are protected, they are respected, and they will be treated fairly. And so we need to also recognize that these two elements are operating in tandem. The work of our military is so important. We need to be so grateful for their dedication. And at the same time, in order for their work to be effective, they need to feel safe and respected and protected. And that's how I think about it. You cannot separate effective service from the additional work that we are doing on the culture side.
Okay. Let's talk about the purpose of it a little bit. You touched on it in the sense that much of what the armed forces does for us isn't directly related to fighting in overseas conflicts. It keeps us safe in other ways, many other ways. When it comes to overseas conflicts, what is your thinking about deployment? And I don't start this. I don't start from a position of personal hawkishness. First of all, I'm a personal coward. I don't want to fight, and so I don't want to easily ask anybody else to fight. I'm not saying that, but I'm just theoretically posing a question that says, and I'm actually not just talking about us. I'm talking about other Western nations. We're not going to fight to defend Hong Kong. We're not going to fight to defend Ukraine. And I'm not saying we should in either of those circumstances, but it raises the question for me of when are we prepared to fight? What is the proper utilization of our armed forces internationally?
So I'm not going to comment on whether you're a coward or not. I don't know you well enough. So we'll just push that point to the side. But
just take it as a given.
Okay. But let me just say that there are so many ways in which the Canadian Armed Forces are serving our domestic and global community that we need to recognize those contributions first and foremost. Let's look at Ukraine, an incredibly focused on area in the world at the current time. Operation Unifier, in place since 2015, has had Canadian troops on the ground training other soldiers. We are, and that's about 200 soldiers, making sure that we are serving alongside troops from other countries, including Denmark, making sure that we are equipping the Ukrainian forces with knowledge and the training skills that we have.
Okay.
Look at what I announced recently in Seoul, $85 million towards the UN peacekeeping missions to sustain our role as one of the largest financial contributors to the peacekeeping mission globally, and we have peacekeepers around the world as well. And so what I would say to you is that we need to stand back and look at how Canadian troops are serving the broader global communities from a number of different vantage points. And that is something that I aim to support every day with Chief of Defense Staff Wayne Eyre. And I'll say that his knowledge from being an on-the-ground member of the Canadian Armed Forces serving in a number of very difficult missions has made us a very formidable team.
Good. That's awesome to hear. Is there a relationship, Minister, between our military contribution to things like NATO or the UN and our standing and our voice in the world?
Can you be more specific?
Do we get more share of voice and share of mind internationally if we're contributing more, if we have more jets and if we have more troops and if we're more present in peacekeeping missions or more present in NATO missions? Does that help us in other ways to be influential globally? And conversely, if we spend less and contribute less, do we have less of a voice internationally, or are those two things unrelated?
They're related, and yes, we do. And that's why we are increasing defense spending by 70% under Strong, Secure, Engaged, which is our defense policy, which has been in place since 2017.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to lose you. You've generously donated an hour of your time to this, and I'm going to lose you. But I have one last question that is really near and dear to my heart. And this is going back to your governance experience and your corporate experience, and now your experience at the heart of two massive departments, public works and procurement on the one hand and defense on the other. It feels to me like people who advocate for government, who believe in government, liberals, are always having to apologize for the inadequacies of government responses, for the inefficiencies of government, and for the way things get rolled out, and for just for the administration of government. And my question is, can we make it better? Or is it just so big that it is what it is? Or can those of us who believe in government as a force for good make it a more effective instrument?
Well, let me just say, David, that we have come through the last year and a half and more because of our ability to work effectively as a government. How did we get 68 million vaccines in this country to lead us ahead of most other countries by the end of July? How did we launch massive financial supports which sustained Canadians and Canadian businesses through the first year and a half of the pandemic, with more to come if needed? We did that because we found a way to be effective and efficient as a government. So yes, there are always going to be difficulties in large organizations from a governance perspective, on the one hand. But what we have seen on the other is that in times of crisis, especially, we are able to work together. We are able to get things done, and we will continue to do that to support Canadians. And if you continue to focus on who needs the support the most, it is much more effective from a decision-making perspective. We will continue working on that as a government. And as a Minister of National Defense, I still am able to play a role because the Canadian Armed Forces have been so important in assisting our country through the last year and a half and more.
Right. Minister, I want to thank you for your time here with us today. I want to thank you for your service to the country and for your commitment to Canada. And I'm thrilled that somebody of your caliber and competence is in our government. So thank you for that. And your career is going to be one to watch with great interest. And I will be watching it with great interest. And have a great holiday.
Okay, I'm glad that's not a question. So let's just say happy holidays. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas and New Year. And we'll talk to you soon. I would like to talk more, David, about how do we encourage more people to run for elected office. those with particular capacities to serve? I think it is a very important question, and we do need to have a longer conversation about that at some point.
It's a huge question. I'm going to get to Daniel right after this, and we'll book you back for that conversation.
Okay, part two
in the new year. Listen, I'm going to be in Regina over Christmas, so if you happen to be at the Moose Jaw Air Base, let me know. I'll come out and buy you a coffee.
I think you're going to see me in the four corners of this office for some time. But if I'm out and about, I'll let you know.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great holiday and a great new year.
David. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, for all of their support over the past year. This podcast would not be possible without them. And so thank you to them for their support of this podcast and of public dialogue in the country. And we'll be back with more TELUS and CN in the new year.
Herle Burly, Herle Burly, Herle Burly.